All right, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today in what's sure to be a pretty interesting webinar. So I'm Daniel Magic from Signify, based in London, and I work on international lighting specification projects. So I partner with lighting designers, consultants, and deliver complex developments all around the world. So Signify, for those, well, some may know us, some may not. So we're the number one lighting company in the world, and I'll share with you some key figures about the company. So, uh, so of our global revenues, 4.3% of that is reinvested into R&D. So for a real number, that's about 260 million euros each year that we put back into R&D. So that helps us generate over 20,000 patents, or we hold over 20,000 patents. And it also helps us with some of our sustainability goals. For example, 35% of our revenues are circular. So that comes from initiatives like My Creation with 3D printed luminaires. And then things like that help us generate a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases from our baseline from 2019. So all pretty impressive numbers. So our purpose as a company is to unlock the extraordinary potential of light for brighter lives and a better world. So really, respecting our world is at the core of our purpose. It's in the products we make. It's how we operate as a company. So we see every project as an opportunity to improve the lives of humans, but also our non-human buddies around the world as well. So I'll hand you over to, well, sorry, I'll introduce Benz to everybody. So he's a senior associate at Spears Major Light Architecture. He studied architectural design at the Royal Academy of Art in The Hague, and then later completed a master's in architectural lighting design at the University of Wismar. So he joined Spears Major in 2008, and he's worked on a wide range of award-winning projects, including the gas holder development at King's Cross and City of London lighting strategy. His work explores how thoughtful lighting can transform the experience of architecture and public spaces. He combines creative design with innovative research. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for the introduction. Excited to start this webinar and present it to you. I think it's going to take about, so say, 30, 40 minutes roughly. So there's some time for Q&A and hopefully, meant to be a discussion more than anything else. So without further ado, let's keep going. In the intro text, we stated a couple of learning objectives. They're quite a bit broadly introduced, as I would say, but we want to focus on some of these items. The value of darkness, as the darkness is an essential part of lighting design, the contrast to light, and this kind of difficult balance that I think all lighting designers struggle with. The kind of which needs to put first, human or ecological needs, the kind of circularity and our experience with that. And obviously the kind of role to AI. One of these items is a kind of a wide subject, and it's really based around my personal question about this idea about consciousness and can we design consciousness. There's so much that comes into us every day that you think, oh, even a few years ago it was quite, there were some more like traditional balancing acts, but now you get this a wide range in terms of including what it means to be creative with AI. So it's just questions in my mind actually, and I guess what all these points connect here is almost two things. One is, do we need to be understanding more how other beings on the planet sees the world around us? Can we kind of be more imaginative for other people? Can we engage more with other people outside ourselves? And the other thing is can we do kind of less, or do we need to do more? And these kind of is actually a running theme between the four. So a bit to start off, I'll tell you a bit about myself. I think to start off with, my traditional inspiration for lighting design came actually from a cinematographer from the kind of film noir age, John Elton, and he wrote a beautiful book about kind of film writing called Painting with Light, which I recommend because he had this kind of philosophy. Obviously, back in the days when they made film noirs, they used actually very minimal equipment to produce maximum effects. Actually, John Elton only made like low budget films, but he invented this art about it's not what you light, but what you don't light. You know, and almost if you think about that in terms of darkness, it's about the importance of darkness. It's like almost the conscious decisions about what we're not going to light is equally important. And I found it really inspiring, and it's a really fun book because it tells in a very kind of old manner, with very basic principle, how to light faces, how to light fabric, but also set up scenery. And first, what is interesting is what's the big difference with lighting design. What we do every day is that we create this environment in a 3D experience, which means it's a lot to do with our vision and the vision of other people. If you're like a cinematographer here, you can obviously compose the image. To stick with the black and white theme, our CEO always put this image in the slide pack because he always compared us with lighting design, with walking a tightrope in terms of balancing it. We're considering so many things, and all these things we need to balance into one thing. And I think the considerations, they're almost kind of three main considerations, right? And the context is crucial. And if we review some projects later on in the presentation, I'll explain a bit more about context. But context is actually important to kind of answer the question of, can we design consciously? Because for one city, brightness means something very different than another place in the world, and we need to be mindful of that, so to say. And then there's a series, obviously, of very design objectives, or we are considering all these kind of objective things like security, cost is a kind of a value, or like how does this thing operate? And then the final thing is how we create atmosphere, and as a consideration. Now, these three consideration, atmosphere is obviously very subjective, because you could have a characteristic. What makes a space beautiful? Beautiful is everybody's have a different kind of view on that, or what does the ambience they prefer. But in the end, we design for people. If that's still the case, I think a really conscious designer, we should not really do that, but we'll come to that in a minute. But the one thing is what we notice, and I think we're trying to change to be better at this, because previously we had to see these values only from one single perspective. But the key is actually to make these people talk together, make an engagement environment, and actually have a much more diverse conversation. And it's really interesting. The final project I will share with you today is a project we did in Holland, where that's exactly happens. You had a panel with ecologists in the room that judge the lighting scheme, at the same time a developer, an architect, or a student did. And that discussion is invaluable going into the future to create more conscious design. But ultimately, we're all humans. We're designed for humans. Humans is the only species in the world that need light, which is a bit, you could look at two ways. If it's very smart, I'm not sure. There's lots of other life forms on Earth that have been around much longer, much more resilient, and they actually they don't use vision as their prime sense to kind of make sense of the world around them. But we need light to get to our daily activities. And for me as a designer, what we found is actually we need light because it's the primary, is for most people, is it the prime kind of sense to make sense of our environment. And I love the German word Umwelt for this, because it's basically, Umwelt means, it direct translated in English is environment, but it's not really what it means. It means actually how you sense your environment around it. And that's what lighting design does in its very core. So it's really interesting because as a species, because we use vision for our senses, we can have a shared Umwelt. And not many species has that, because not many other animals, they often don't use vision as their prime sense in the world, and therefore their relationship with others is different. But we have this kind of benefit that we can actually share our prime sense, which is vision, which then also we can create spaces that we can enjoy together with light. Obviously, it makes sense that we utilize the darkness as much as the light, because without the darkness, we won't see the light. I mean, there's a beautiful phrase I heard once, and it's actually that light is just diluted darkness. And if we think about less is more, that's exactly what it is, right? You have a darkness, and then you just slightly dilute it with more and more light. And the question is, how much light do you add to dilute it? Because obviously that's how you change the perception of space around us. But it also does something else. It does also have this very strong connection with time. And there's a lot of research on, and especially when we've done research for healthcare projects, is that it's obviously not the circadian rhythm that is always the case, changing colors and intensity, but it's also the dynamic nature of change in daylight that gives us a sense of time. You take that out in non-daylit environments, and you're missing that kind of essential connection. But we all live on the pale blue planet, a very small planet that we share with lots of other species. So, for example, we just did a project for Light 25. If you don't know, there's a big light fair here in London, where we're lucky enough to do a light installation for ARC. If you are a jumping spider, we researched lots of visions and perception of light from other animals, and this jumping spider jumped out to me because as he grows older, his light sensitive cells, detecting cells, they get more sensitive. So for him, it's almost like the sun rises his entire life, which I thought was quite beautiful. It's quite interesting because humans obviously go the other way. For us, it gets darker and darker, but for a spider, it's a completely different perception. And as I said earlier, what's so interesting about that is that our world, we think that our world is everything, like every animal, and often people mistake that every animal have kind of vision, but they don't. And every animal makes the same mistake. And that's a big problem, I think, with when we talk about ecology and lighting and consciousness and lighting, is that we do not quite know how others around us, other beings, actually experience the space around us. There's a very famous philosopher, Thomas Nagel, that said about, he described in an article about you can never truly experience what it means to be a bat, because you can only simulate fragments of it, because we don't have the same senses apparatus in our body, we don't really know. But also, even with our fellow humans, we don't really know. So, if you're colorblind, you might see the colors quite differently. And that really inspired us to make this installation in Light 25, which was a kind of a little kind of triangular shaped space that you go into, and you get submerged in color, because we realized you never can get the sense of another animal, but what we could do is take the one single thing, and that's how other animals might see colors. Right? So an octopus, for example, you see here in the render, sees the world in grayscales and a hint of blue. So you enter the blue space, your perception of color changes, and then we stuck the Israel color blindness plates on the wall, which then changes perception again. And it's really interesting when I spoke to the organizer of ARC, and he actually was colorblind. He couldn't read all the things, and that's really important for us, because what we often don't do enough as designers to be more conscious. You need to be really trying to kind of step out of your own comfort zone, and you need to kind of to imagine what it is to be another, to really understand what it is to be somebody else. So this was a render. These are some final installations where you go into this tunnel. And the idea was almost to kind of make people aware of that. So you stare eye to eye with this animal that has a different perception and a different coloration. So to make it to kind of Schopenhauer really knew it last century. We take our limits. The view of our vision is the limits of our own world, which is not true. And I think this is something really we should learn, because everybody talks about human-centric design, and from human-centric design followed into human-centric lighting, which is obviously very good, as described in the ISO guidelines. But it's not enough. And I think especially for lighting, you talk about human-centric lighting, but it misses lots of points, because if you only talk about human-centric lighting, it's a bit selfish, because you need to think about the impact it has on the other inhabitants of our planet. So is it people? Is it ecology? That's the big questions that we're going to ask. You can't really combine them, because animals, they don't need light. Although it is true that some city birds now, they go hunting out later, so they make use of artificial light as well as we do. We were lucky to test this kind of theory in a project here in Canada Water, here in East London, where they made a new nature reserve, and in the nature reserve is a boardwalk. that sort of spirit. And they had bad patterns overall. We do that a lot in the UK, and I'm sure the rest of the world as well. As soon as it's bad as there, you have to do all such things. But the wildlife conservation specialists gave us these kind of lists, and I think it's very kind of known for bats. The kind of wider light is less good. Obviously, the relative tones are better, and red light will be much better. So warmer tones, less UV, and obviously we thought it was interesting because for us it needs to go beyond candlelight to have a better color temperature for bats. What was interesting is they monitor the flight patterns of they did the study of how many bats flew around, and realized that bats don't use the space all the time. So they hibernate in the winter. So it doesn't quite matter how you light the bridge then or walk then, because they're not flying around, they're not active. But when they're active in the summer seasons, then you can change the light. So the lighting control system actually not only follows the kind of daylight hours to be switched on, but also it changes color temperature when the bats are active. So in the summer, the light will get warmer to disturb and dimmer to disturb less bats while humans can use it. On the winter, when it's very gloomy at 4 o'clock here in the UK and London, it's actually a good kind of bright light for people to walk and to commute over when they walk to the tube station. So therefore, we look very closely at when does certain species use the environment. So if bats use it, it's a much more friendly light. This is the detail we did with lots of Ubers and putting light spill in the water. And we did lots of studies, obviously, in calculations. So this is how the final project looked. And by the way, I forgot to say, it's a project by Asif Khan, a really amazing architect. And you can see the kind of red and the little spill lights it gets in the water other than the reflection. And here it's actually our measurements from site. So you can see that although it's red, which is quite interesting, because when you did the warm solar tone, it's hard to see actually. And it also makes me kind of think, it's like, well, hold on, it's a very small thing, because for us, the perception of the color of the bridge actually doesn't really change. And we had to measure it if it did change. And it did go down from 3000 Kelvin, quite neutral warm white, to a very, very warm light. But because of the red tone of the bridge, you couldn't really see it. But once you measure it, it's true, it goes up the Kelvin scale. And what was quite interesting. But light or darkness, obviously darkness is even better for the ecology. But then is the question even more asked, which one do you choose? So but darkness to manifest, to produce more darkness in light, we need to look more at master planning in cities, like London, but also in guidance. And we have worked with the City of London for a number of years in creating kind of master plans to kind of make the city darker. They had streets that are lit to quite extraordinary levels of light. Other streets, and now they try to all reduce it to follow the master plan. But what's really interesting is that in the City of London, we also helped them to create a document for the planning department for lighting to become officially part of the planning process. So every building now in the City of London has to submit a planning application for lighting, which is a first in the UK, and I think a first one of the first in the world, where you got guidelines that they set out for how many light can spill out from a building, and if I use lighting, how much can go up, and how it should look like. And it's been really fascinating process, because as a designer to be on the other side, it's quite different, and also just that kind of realistic targets. But this is a mechanism we felt, and that can really introduce much more darkness in cities. I mean, I was just lucky to kind of be helping the team, but I think it's kind of it's a really interesting process. And you remember I said earlier about context. Context is obviously very important, because London is a relatively dark city, I would say, other than the city cluster, which is the City of London, and they try to reduce the light. If you go to a place like Hong Kong, for example, where we've done various projects, Hong Kong is a very bright city, although they have now also light regulations to kind of reduce the light pollution in the city. But it's a very different atmosphere of light. For our project here in Taikoo, which is East Hong Kong, we did a lot of surveys actually. And what's interesting, this is a long-term project because it consists of buildings, lobbies, walkways, a big park in the middle, and it's been ongoing for quite a few years actually. So we're glad it's finished. But this is in East Hong Kong, and what we did was very exciting for us at the time is that we did not go with any ideas or pre-consumption ideas and actually investigating the context first. So rather than walking remote on a project to say, well, let's not come up with any ideas, let's go there and kind of see what the light is actually about. We came with very simple objectives to say, you obviously can only understand the night when you see the context, but also that kind of the brightness is obviously quite relative to where you are. So we measured stuff like reflections of clouds and surfaces around, and looked at the luminosity and realized that the kind of luminance values are equally important as illuminance values in a place like Hong Kong, because the amount of general spill light, and you have to walk quite far to actually get to a dark place where your lux really goes below zero, below one. But it's interesting that the light spill and the sky glow all form part of this thing. And from our side, we understand that lots of people actually use the park at dark. So it wouldn't be fair in a place like Hong Kong where outdoor use of parks is very popular to make a dark park for ecology. But also, how do you see things from above and how much light levels are there? And we came up with this series of findings from the context. And you can see here, these values are the kind of luminance values. And you can see the brightness of the sky against the buildings is quite phenomenal. So the thing is that we also found this kind of very key objectives, like unlit canopies look quite gloomy actually, and then you're sitting with a park that's very occupied. So is that justified to kind of light more of the park to show more of the ecology at night? We felt it was actually compared to maybe different than the ecological zone in London somewhere. Just briefly about the project before we go into more details, that the project consists of parks, a walkway, very common in Hong Kong, and you look down on this park. And the idea is that you walk through the walkway, you walk through this kind of landscape that has this very biodiverse planting in Hong Kong. They use it for education. They've got something like hundreds of different species which are native to Hong Kong in this park actually, which is really interesting. And one of the key things we wanted to do was to actually bring out kind of a natural landscape. And we think from our survey we found of the light pollution in Hong Kong is that one thing we really miss is this idea of natural moonlight. And this is already a few years ago now, so maybe we've changed our mind now about this. But at the time we thought like that idea of the moonlight, we wanted to kind of get that play with the silver light, because it's something that everyone actually not almost give a more educational value to it. As you can see here, the kind of muted tones against the warmer tones. It's very interesting to kind of show planting and aid to the educational value of the park. So the moon is normally, even if it shines up in the sky, you can't really experience moonlight. So we added that as a kind of silver tone. And with that, we kind of realized that, which is true, is like most people don't use their scotopic vision anymore because city light is just too bright. Now, during the night, when you use your scotopic vision, the light is actually warmer because if you use your rod cells, you actually see less color. That's why you see it as blue. What we wanted to try and do is almost emulate that, to kind of get the sense of that kind of nation that this has disappeared, which is slightly at odds, I have to say, because we add more equipment in that sense. We should have added less. But the idea was to kind of create that sense. And I remember the client saying, in the end, he was happy with it because it did remember him of the light when he goes out walking at night in the mountains in Hong Kong, when you do get kind of that silvery moonlight, which is so fascinating to see and get this kind of light. And we did lots of research in what that actually is, because it's not blue light, it's a kind of silver tone that renders plants in a certain way, which we then really said it's around 16 Kelvin. And here it is 16,000 Kelvin on the meter. And it's quite interesting because it looks quite pale. And what's so fascinating is you walk into a city where you have all the regular lights, but then when you enter this park, you feel the kind of difference in tone, in atmosphere and ambience, which actually feels very natural. And this is really what's the most interesting thing, is that you see plants different during the day as during the night. So this is a photo during the day, and at night different colors comes out because we use different colors. Some of the plants are deliberately muted, so you see the shape and the form. Other forms, like the white flowers, really stand out against the kind of green because of different reflectance value. So the ecological experience of all these beautiful plants is very different at night, which we believe helps the educational value of the project. You can see here some pink flowers that are sitting on the left image against the kind of paler moonlight, silver light effect, against the kind of more warmer light on the image on the right. And that difference in perspective gives a different, reads kind of elements, reads the kind of botanic characteristics differently, which we felt is so interesting. Now, obviously, you can say, what you need to leave that part dark, but the point is that part will never be done because there will always be so much occupancy still light. But now we've created an ambience that you can educational value and leave other parts darker. And one thing about the design process is really interesting. I know one of the learning curves that we need to talk a little bit today about is obviously the rise of AI that I'm sure affects everybody on this call. But this project, we wanted to kind of create something more natural. So we've built a physical model, actually, of this, a physical lighting model, which we then lit with torches and filters and so on. And it was very exciting. So this was the kind of the moonlit version of the model, and this was the kind of then filled in with bits and white light to kind of highlight the plant. And what's really interesting looking back on this process now when we did this, it was the timing to make it, right? You make a model, take time, model these plants. We had like 6 people around holding torches, everybody chit-chatting about this. You get a very dynamic conversation about light, also about shadows and plants and how it feels. And we feel it's very realistic. And there's lots of conversation. And it's really interesting because that part of engagement, we will talk a bit more, is so important, I think, to create more conscious design instead of trying to take more opinions in to create better design. Obviously, nowadays with DeFi or other kind of what I kind of label as the gamification, other kind of real-time renders engines, the lighting goes really, really fast. But this is me and a colleague, or like the colleague renderer. I can't do this stuff. But, he's doing it super precise. But it is less conversation, but still, it still creates depth of effect, and it's incredible how realistic it is, and how fast it is, and how much renders we do. So when we built the model, it took weeks, and we got a couple of nice photos. This one is a few days, and you have like 40, 50 renders, endless, and a good collaboration with architects. That's a fair point, but different process. Obviously, with the rise of AI, this process goes even faster. Okay, so obviously we all have probably experimented with ChatGPT or Midjourney. These kind of things is like almost scarily fast. Okay, so this is a kind of reference image to mention that. And we ran out of time for a project, so our CEO just dumped it in ChatGPT. 5 minutes later, we have this kind of lit environment. Now, obviously, you can probably go on about what's wrong with this image, but the ambience is kind of okay, and it's super quick. It's like 5 minutes. I mean, for me, it doesn't make the point about this is the kind of it misses the conversation process to me because it's so fast. So you're like, oh, it's a nice image, but what does it really mean? So the other interesting bit is the upside of it is this kind of idea of creative evolution, and it's Picasso said famously, a good artist copies, but a great artist steals, and in a way that is what AI also allows you to do. We created some illustrations for one of our philosophies about light, abstract illustrations, and what's so fascinating is like the speed you can make stuff in Midjourney and the feedback you get and stuff you haven't never thought about yourself. For example, a representation of seasons that we use a lot in our work with, because seasonal lighting is important for us, whether the tree has green leaves or no leaves or brown leaves or yellow leaves throughout the seasonal cycles. So we always use that as an example to show seasons. But obviously, Midjourney says, well, fruit is a very seasonal thing to show that. And it's really, I find it as a designer quite inspiring to get that feedback. But it's weird to get that feedback from a machine rather than when we did the model mock-up, the kind of model we made, we had feedback bouncing off each other, bouncing off ideas, which is much more human, maybe slightly better. What's also fascinating for the next step on AI is that a few years ago we did this project to make an installation about the third age of light. And what the third age of light, what it means is that we're imagining how London would look like in 2050 or beyond, and came up with this kind of naive idea that you might all wear glasses that are augmented. You don't need any more lighting because the augmented glasses will render the London however you want it, or if you want to walk around Victorian gaslit London, or in a hyper kind of realistic London, or an 80s Tron London, or something that you could kind of use your glasses like that. Now, a few weeks ago, I tried AI glasses from Meta. I'm sure we all have seen them. Hopefully, I'm sure some of you have tried them already as well. Which is, I personally found it a bit scary. You wear these glasses with a constant AI person talking to you and describing the world for you and translating the world for you, giving you directions without you actually noticing, and take photos for you without noticing. And the salesperson said that next generation is coming soon. We'll have the documentation into that. So suddenly, AI is very close to kind of render the world around you, which means that our kind of naive vision from a few years ago might be happening next year if Meta brings out these glasses. And then the question is, how much light do you really need? Or do you then say, well, actually, everything's for ecology, and we're going to use our AI? But that means a very close perception of the world. And one thing I felt really interesting when you use that AI glasses is that you don't stop talking to the world. You stop looking to the world because you're only being listened to what the person or an AI person is saying in your head. And you do not communicate less with people. And as I said earlier at the start, being more conscious is a question of better engagement with people around us, and better engagement with everybody. Last year, we completed the project, Dome Tower, an historic project in the center of Holland, in Utrecht, which is very kind of medieval kind of town. Very, very beautiful old houses and this kind of 700-year-old tower. And we were so lucky to be able to light this important monument twice. And it has been opened by the Queen twice, which is exciting if you're a Dutch person like me. But it was interesting that when we did it the second time around, it was very different than the first time. The first time it was like an artwork. So they came in and did the light art thing. It was very almost looking back about it a bit selfish. You have this kind of monument to the city, and then you come around as a lighting designer and say, well, I kind of like this thing. Okay, this is how it should be. And the second time around was really good because the city compiled an overview of the city of Utrecht with a series of people. So there were students, neighbors, ecologists, developers, architects, and had this commission that then reviewed the lighting scheme, which was very interesting because we thought we're going to present our kind of award-winning scheme, which the first time around in 2012 won a few awards, and which we were very proud of. But then we presented that, and you're like, suddenly a student says, hold on a minute, I think that's too dark there. And you're like, first reaction is like, oh, no, because this team has won incredible amount of awards. Were you to tell me that? But then you kind of second thought about that, say, oh, hold on, I need to be a better designer. I need to be more conscious. I actually should listen to what the student has to say, and try to set your ego aside. And I was surprised to myself, if I'm totally honest, that I thought my ego was less, but I learned it wasn't. So you have to step back and actually listen, and listen to all the people, listen to the neighbor, listen to how people actually use the tower at night, and it become a different scheme. And when we look, the comparison about this is significant because the towers are lit more or less the same way, but obviously there was a big restoration work, so the stone work is very different. But I won't go into all these details. We don't have time for that. But the schemes are different in a good way, because the first scheme was us as a designer to say, this is the light. The second scheme, what is now there, is a city by the people. We have worked very hard to incorporate everybody's comments, including the students, and it became a project that was less about us. It's actually about the community around it, about the city, and that's right, because it's a tower from the city. That's how we should think. the other thing I think is so interesting for us is that, so we talk about community, is that they use it in a different way than you expect. You know, the council came back to us to say, we want color changing lights now. The second time around, we're like, oh, maybe not. We don't like it. But then you realize, no, we should do it, because you know that's what a city, what the community makes. That's how they use it as a communication platform. I found this, I think now called X platform, and when a Dutch female team, a football team went champion, they went to put filters on each layers of the tower to create the Dutch flag. Obviously, you can do that with color changing lights very easily, and but you can say very highbrow as a designer, no, I don't think a monument should do that. Or you can say, no, actually, this is a monument actively for the city. We should embrace it because it's part of the community. And actually, the historian on the panel really liked it, because Gothic architecture is all about color. So before that, back in the days, this is a very old photo tower, no questions asked. But now also the other question really you need to ask yourself with lighting these monuments: why do you light it? You know, why do we light stuff? You know, why do we light mountains in Hong Kong? Why do you light this tower? Because actually it's better to dark. But there's a benefit, there's a value to it, and that is we review architecture that you can't see by day, and it becomes an educational tool for people, and it becomes a beacon for people, and it shouldn't be on the whole night. So what's interesting, this is between the day and the night. You can see the different details you can see, which I can talk for a long time about it, but we don't have time for that. What I really want to talk about here for this project is this circularity, which we had a very interesting first pass onto, because it was our kind of original scheme, and that for many reasons it got redesigned, and mainly about the restoration of the tower. And the first scheme was more or less built to be more temporary, because it didn't want to kind of damage the structure, obviously. So once they start to renovate the tower, they obviously put everything in a skip, and then they came back to us saying, and we said to them, you know, you can just place it back. You know, you don't throw it away. Don't make new stuff. So we went. Luckily, they stored all these boxes. They didn't do a good job of filing, which is one good for circularity. You need to have systems in place to file the systems. You know, the product passports need to be in place, because we just went through a skip with luminaires, all sorts of pigeon poo on it, and so this is used. This you can't use, obviously, strobes, xenon lamps. You can't use them anymore. But most of these lights were made by a local manufacturer, ProLight, and it's great, because he is a true local hero in my opinion. A local small manufacturer that took happily all the equipment back, remade it, and put the new technology inside. Use the housing, through the most embodied carbon is obviously in the metal housing. We took that away and reused it. We did loads of experimenting in lenses. Obviously, when you have a color change, it gets really, really complicated. The original luminaires were made for Cicado chips. It's kind of big, wider everything. The new ones are smaller and in multi-chip shots, but we managed in the end, and I think it was good, because all these luminaires went back. We also realized that some details work very well for circularity, like in-ground luminaires. Obviously, it's not great to repair, not great to replace. And this is the old scheme that had obviously beautiful in-ground lights, always nice in the photo. In reality, it's not great in reality. So we replaced them back in a much better place, and you see this is now easier to exchange and repair than before, which increases the kind of attitude to a lighting scheme that is upgradable, flexible, and changeable, and luminaires can be taken away and used somewhere else. Other thing was really interesting is that the previous scheme had all clamps, as I said before, so it was much more temporary, not to damage the monument. But it means you can take and reuse everything. So the clamping technology and what they use in theater for a long time, they can actually it is a very good thing for circularity. You should ask yourself about it. How can I kind of make things that actually you can take out? How can you detail this? The new detail on the right, proposal on the right, use much more fixed bars, but has the same kind of logic to it. So this was the old scheme, which was essentially a brake with a light and a big bulky driver at the back. So in the new scheme, we take the luminaire, put the driver underneath, and follow a bit of metal to kind of make the connectors more permanent and kind of more resilient for people, because people kind of use these spaces for tours every day. Hundreds of people come around, and then the new scheme uses the old luminaires and has this same driver houses and boxes underneath it. It looks a bit more professional, I guess, than the first time around. But essentially, it has the same kind of simple logic to it, where you can take things and take it away for repair and reuse. And interesting enough, we also reuse the ideas. And to talk about AI and creative evolution, back in the 16th century, so 1516, there was the idea the tower to have a lantern at the top and actually radiate out over the city. And act as in a globe. And that's something we actually took that idea, not hanging something, by locating some of the luminous insides and make this top of the tower radiate out globe. That really fits with the Gothic principles of reaching for the stars and the heavens, which then is a similar concept from ages ago. Same for the dark base. So to finish up, it was really interesting once we completed this project. And I think one of the main interesting things for us as doing this project is the question about would you precisely do the same again, or we were trying to do less. We were trying to do, and actually we're trying to do very hard to do less. I think the conclusion was, unfortunately, we did not do less. We wanted to do less because I think doing less is so important. This is more conscious, right, to do less, but we added some more functionality to it and we lit spaces that were formerly unseen, never been seen from the public or from views from outside. So we added the creative value. And the biggest thing, the value that has been added, is has been taking a project that has become a project from and by the city and for the city, which is place the designer in a more humble position and really try to listen, which is my biggest lesson learned on this project, which I now trying to do on every project actually. Because actually, to conclude, the kind of the aim is always to do less, unless you're tempted to do more, and ask yourself really why. Why do you need more stuff? Do you need more AI vendors? Do you need more equipment? If it's just for yourself, don't do it. Hold back. If it really helps others, if it makes the city a better place for this particular time, then do it with care. Because that is a sensible thing, and I think that's the balance we should need to strike. That's the balance from Charles Chapman on the kind of tightrope when you're walking with sticks. That's the balance we should try and do, and that's the question of the conscious designer in the future. Thank you very much for listening, and remember that filled up in the universe is a small planet we need to take care of. Thank you.